The hallway was loud that morning. It was always loud at Westbrook University on the first Monday of fall semester. Footsteps on polished concrete, locker doors catching metal frames. 100 conversations bleeding into each other until the sound became something you stopped hearing. A white noise that meant the year had started, that everything was moving again, that the long, empty summer was finally over. Nobody was paying attention to anything in particular. That was the thing about crowds. They gave you the illusion of witnesses without ever actually giving you one. She walked through the middle of it with her bag pressed against her chest and her eyes aimed at the floor 2 feet in front of her. Not rushing, not dawdling, moving at exactly the pace of someone who has calculated the precise speed required to be invisible. Her name was Sloane Reeves. She was 19 years old. She was from Columbus, Ohio. And she had arrived at this campus 6 days earlier with one duffel bag, one backpack, and a very specific plan for how the next 4 years of her life were going to go. The plan was simple: show up, study, graduate, disappear into a career that required none of this, none of the noise, none of the performance, none of the theater that college hallways had always seemed to require of her. She had a merit scholarship, full tuition, the kind that got renewed every semester as long as you kept your GPA above 3.8 and stayed out of trouble. She had a room in Merritt Hall's second-floor corner unit. She had 3 textbooks she had already started reading. She had a plan. What she did not have was any reason to believe on that particular Monday morning that the next 40 minutes would end with a young man lying on the floor at her feet and 200 people holding their breath. But that is exactly what happened. And to really understand why, you need to go back further than that morning. You need to go back to who she was before she ever set foot in this hallway. Because what happened in those 40 minutes was not an accident. It was not luck. It was not even, strictly speaking, a surprise. It was the result of a very long chain of events that had started in a different hallway in a different city when Sloane Reeves was a different person entirely. We will get to all of that, but first the floor. He was not a small man. Cole Harmon stood 6'2" and weighed 215 on a light week. He was the starting wide receiver for the Westbrook Wolves, a team that had not made the conference playoffs in 11 years, but carried itself with the confidence of a program that had once mattered deeply and believed on some cellular level that it still did. Cole had his father's build, his father's walk, and his father's name carved into the trophy case outside the athletic center. He had grown up hearing about Frank Harmon the way other kids grew up hearing about scripture, repeated, reverent, and completely non-negotiable. He was on the floor. His right hand was pressed flat against the concrete, trying to remember how it had gotten there. His left arm was folded at an angle that would leave a bruise for 2 weeks. Around him, the hallway had gone absolutely still, in the way that large spaces only go still when something has happened that nobody has a category for. Not a fight? Not exactly. Something faster than a fight. Something that had been over before most people had registered it beginning. Sloane stood above him. She was 5'6", maybe 5'7", in the boots she wore that morning. She weighed 138 pounds. She had dark hair pulled back from her face and a gray hoodie that was slightly too large for her shoulders. She was looking down at him with an expression that was not anger, and was not satisfaction, and was not fear. It was something harder to name, something that looked to the people watching almost like exhaustion. She said 2 words. That was restraint. Then she picked up her notebook from the floor, adjusted the strap of her bag, and walked down the hallway. Nobody stopped her. Nobody said a word. She did not look back. The crowd watched her go. Cole Harmon stayed on the floor for another 4 seconds before his legs remembered what they were for. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Westbrook University sat on the western edge of Hargrove County, Illinois, about 90 miles from Chicago, and about 40 years from anywhere that felt modern. It was the kind of campus that had been built in the 1960s with a specific vision of what college was supposed to look like. Brick buildings, wide lawns. A clock tower that had not worked correctly since 1994, but still stood because nobody could agree on whether fixing it was worth the money. The enrollment was around 8,000 students. The endowment was modest. The faculty was a mix of people who had chosen Westbrook deliberately and people who had ended up there by the process of elimination that academic careers sometimes become. The football team had 312,000 followers on social media. The literary magazine had 60. That ratio told you most of what you needed to know about the social architecture of the place. The athletic department occupied a separate wing of the main building that had been renovated twice in the last decade, while the science lab still ran on equipment purchased during the Clinton administration. The players walked a particular way through campus, not arrogant exactly, but gravitational. Like they understood that the space around them was theirs by a kind of informal consensus, and that the consensus had been ratified so many times it had stopped needing to be stated. Cole Harmon was not the worst of them. That matters. The easy version of this story makes him a villain, and the easy version is wrong. He was a young man who had been given a very specific idea of who he was supposed to be, and he had been given it so early and so consistently that it had become indistinguishable from identity. His father, Frank Harmon, had been the best wide receiver Westbrook had ever produced, a two-time all-conference selection, a man whose photograph appeared in 4 places on campus, not counting the trophy case. A man who had spent the 20 years since his playing days polishing the legend until it shone so bright that his son could not see past it. Cole had been raised on that legend, the way some kids are raised on religion, with the same absolute certainty, the same absence of alternatives. He was 20 years old. He was fast. He was good, genuinely good, not just legacy good. But he played for a program that had not mattered in over a decade in a town that still talked about the 1987 championship, the way old men talk about a war they won. And somewhere in the gap between who he actually was and who his father's shadow required him to be, something had curdled. Not into cruelty exactly, into performance, into the habit of making himself large in spaces where he felt underneath everything terrifyingly small. His 2 closest companions on the team were a linebacker named Dex and a safety named Patterson. They were not bad people either. They were young men who had learned that laughter was the price of proximity to Cole, and they had been paying it so long they had forgotten it was a transaction. Derek Nash was different. He had known Cole since freshman orientation and moved in adjacent circles without fully occupying Cole's orbit. Derek recorded things he always had since his older brother had handed him a used camera in junior year of high school and told him that the only way to learn to see was to practice looking. He carried his phone like other people carried notebooks. He recorded the campus the way a naturalist records a habitat, not with agenda, but with the reflexive compulsion of someone who believes that the unremarked moment is the one most worth preserving. His reputation on campus was specific and universally acknowledged. Derek Nash had footage of everything. If something happened at Westbrook and you needed to know whether it had been captured, the first name anyone said was his. He had been standing near the stairwell on Monday morning with his phone up before Cole had done anything. He was recording the general texture of the hallway, the first day energy, the particular collision of people who had spent 3 months apart and were recalibrating their relationships in real time. He was not pointed at Cole specifically. He was pointed at the hallway. The 3 of them, Cole, Dex, Patterson, were standing near the main stairwell at 7:50 that morning when Sloane Reeves came around the corner. Cole saw her the way he saw most things he had not yet assigned a category to, with the particular alertness of someone who has learned that the world requires constant management. She was new. He knew she was new because he knew everyone on this campus the way a territorial animal knows its range. She was walking with her head down her bag, pulled tight, moving through the crowd like someone who was trying to take up as little space as possible. He decided in that moment to give her a reason to. This was not a plan. It was not even really a decision, not in the conscious sense. It was a reflex built from years of practice, the automatic move of a young man who had learned that maintaining his position required occasional demonstrations of it. She was new. She was alone. The hallway was full. The conditions were exactly right. He stepped into her path. Now, we need to pause here and talk about Sloane Reeves. Not the Sloane Reeves standing in that hallway on that Monday morning, but the one who had existed before her. The one who had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Columbus's East Side with her mother, a night shift nurse named Patricia, who worked 4 days a week and slept through most of the daylight hours, and who had raised her daughter to be quiet, careful, and self-sufficient in the way that women who work night shifts often raise their daughters. Sloane had been a good student her whole life. Not spectacular, not the kind of student whose teachers wrote letters about them to universities. The kind of student who sat in the middle of the room and understood everything and rarely raised her hand, not because she didn't know the answers, but because she had learned early that the act of knowing the answer was a separate thing from the act of performing. Knowing the answer and the performance had never interested her much. She had gone to Lincoln High School in Columbus. She had been there from 9th grade through the beginning of 11th. What happened during those 2 years is not a story that moves quickly. It rarely does. It started the way these things always start, not with a single event, but with a slow accumulation of small ones. A comment in the lunch line, a shoulder check in the hallway that was just slightly too deliberate, A text message that appeared in a group chat she had not been invited to join, shared by someone who wanted her to know she was being discussed. Small things. The kind of things that are individually deniable but collectively constitute a sustained and systematic campaign to make someone understand that they are not wanted. By the middle of 10th grade, the small things had become larger things. By the fall of 11th grade, Sloane Reeves had been physically assaulted 3 times, had photographs of herself taken without her knowledge, and distributed across 3 different platforms, had been excluded from the social architecture of her school so completely that she had begun eating lunch in the library and taking alternate routes between classes to avoid specific corridors at specific times. She had not told her mother. Patricia worked nights and slept days and worried enough already, and Sloane had decided with the logic of a 16-year-old trying to manage an unmanageable situation that adding her mother's fear to her own would not help either of them. She had not told any teachers because the one time she had approached a teacher in the fall of 10th grade, the teacher had said in a tone of genuine helplessness, "Have you tried just ignoring them?" And Sloane had understood from that moment that the institution was not going to be useful to her. She carried it alone. For 8 months she carried it alone. And then on a Tuesday night in November of her junior year, she stopped being able to. She spent 3 weeks in a psychiatric facility in Columbus. Her mother drove to the hospital from a night shift without sleeping first. The doctors were kind, the facility was clean. None of that is the point. The point is that when Sloane Reeves came home, she was different in a way that she could not fully articulate, but that her mother could see in the set of her shoulders and the particular quality of her silences. She was not broken. She needs you to understand that. What had broken was a specific version of herself, the one who had believed on some fundamental level that endurance was a strategy. That if you kept your head down long enough and took up small enough space, the world would eventually leave you alone. She no longer believed that. 2 weeks after coming home, she walked into a Krav Maga class being held in the gymnasium of a Presbyterian church on the east side of Columbus. The class was run by a man named Warren Briggs, who was 68 years old, who had served 2 tours with the 75th Ranger Regiment in the early 80s, and who had been teaching self-defense to teenagers in this gymnasium every Tuesday and Thursday evening for the past 9 years, charging nothing, because he had come to the conclusion that this was the most useful thing he could do with the time he had left. Warren Briggs was not a warm man in any conventional sense. He did not smile easily, and he did not ask personal questions, and he had no particular gift for the kind of encouragement that youth programs usually run on. What he had instead was a complete and total seriousness about the thing he was teaching, and a quality of attention that made you feel when he was watching you that he was seeing something that mattered. He watched Sloane for the first 2 sessions without saying much. Then at the end of the third session, he asked her to stay after. He said, "I'm not teaching you to fight." She waited. He said, "I'm teaching you to never be helpless again." She trained with Warren Briggs for 14 months, Tuesday and Thursday evenings and Saturday mornings when her mother didn't need the car. He was rigorous in a way she had not encountered before, not harsh, not cruel, but absolutely uncompromising about the standard. A movement was either correct or it was not. A drill was either completed or it was done again. There was no partial credit, no good enough, no consolation for effort without precision. He made her repeat the same foundational sequence until it stopped being something she performed and became something she was. She ran the complete sequence 4,000 times across 14 months. She knows that number because she counted, not because he told her to, but because counting gave her something to hold on to on the evenings when her arms were exhausted and she could not remember why she was there. 4,000 times. By the end of 14 months, the movement was not something she thought about. It lived below thought in the part of the body that acts before the mind has finished deciding. She applied to Westbrook University in the spring of her senior year and received the Merit Scholarship in April. Full tuition, full renewal conditions. She read the contract 4 times before signing it. She understood what was at stake. She had one plan: show up, study, graduate, stay invisible, never be helpless again. She arrived on campus 6 days before the fall semester began. She unpacked her one duffel bag and her one backpack into the corner room on the second floor of Merritt Hall. She made one trip to the campus bookstore and one trip to the grocery on Hargrove Avenue. She went to the library on her first evening and chose the chair in the far corner, the one with the solid wall behind it, in an unobstructed view of the entrance. It was the kind of choice she made without deliberating anymore. The way you choose which side of the street to walk on in a city you've learned the hard way. Not fear exactly. More like fluency in a language that most people never have to learn. She did not think about Lincoln High. She did not allow herself to think about Lincoln High. She had a plan. On the Sunday night before the semester started, Sloane Reeves did something that she had been doing in one form or another since she came home from the facility in Columbus. She sat at her desk with a blank piece of paper and she thought through every scenario she could reasonably anticipate for the next day. Not anxiously, not in the circular, sleepless way that she had once thought through scenarios when she was trying to survive Lincoln High. Methodically, the way Warren Briggs had taught her to think about a training drill: identify the space, identify the variables, identify the response. She knew from 6 days of walking this campus that the main hallway on the first floor of the academic building was the primary traffic artery between 7:30 and 8:15 on weekday mornings. She knew that the athletic department occupied the East Wing. She knew from the roster she had looked up online that the football team had started fall camp 3 weeks ago and would be well into their established social patterns by now. She knew that new students were sometimes targeted in those first weeks, not from paranoia but from pattern recognition that had been earned the hard way. She was not expecting a confrontation. She was doing what she always did now, thinking through the space before she entered it, so that if something happened, she would not be starting from zero. On the piece of paper, she wrote a list: potential witnesses by location, likely camera angles based on what she had observed about the security system during her library visits, the sequence of events as she intended to move through the morning. She folded the paper and put it in the front pocket of her bag. She went to sleep at 10:15. She woke up at 6. She walked into the hallway at 7:52. When Cole Harmon stepped into her path, Sloane stopped. Her shoulder twitched not from surprise, but from the recognition of a pattern. She had felt this before. The specific quality of a body positioning itself deliberately in your way. The micro-adjustment of weight that signals not accident, but intention. She said sorry. She tried to move around him. He moved with her. She stopped again. He was looking at her the way she recognized the performance look, calibrated for an audience aware of exactly how many people were watching. Dex and Patterson had spread slightly to either side, the unconscious flanking of a group that has done this before, the spatial arrangement of people who know their role without needing to discuss it. He said, "Hey, watch where you're going." And then a quick motion, almost casual in its confidence, he knocked her books out of her arms. The sound was bigger than it should have been. Notebooks, a thick textbook, 3 pens, a set of index cards she had been working on the night before. They scattered across the hallway floor in a radius that felt absurd, designed to maximize the visual of her crouching down in the middle of this busy corridor to collect them. The hallway did not go completely silent, but it changed. The particular change that spaces make when they sense that something real is happening, conversations trailing off bodies, turning the diffuse attention of a crowd, suddenly acquiring a focal point. Sloane went down on one knee and began gathering the papers. Her hands were steady. This surprised her. She had imagined in the past that when something like this happened, again her hands would shake. They had shaken at Lincoln High. They had shaken in the car afterward, in the shower, at the dinner table. But her hands were steady now, and she realized it was because the part of her brain that Warren Briggs had spent 14 months training was already running its own assessment, calm and separate from whatever her chest was doing. Cole crouched down beside her. He leaned close. He said in a voice pitched with precision, loud enough for the corridor to hear, quiet enough to maintain the fiction of intimacy, "Do you really think someone like you belongs here?" Sloane stopped moving, her hands still resting on the scattered pages. She raised her head slowly, looked at him. His face was confident, performing confidence. His eyes were waiting for her to look away first. They always waited for that. The look away was the acknowledgement, the submission, the thing the performance required to conclude correctly. She did not look away. "What?" He tilted his head. His smile sharpened. "No, tears can't even do that right." He reached down and picked up her notebook, the black one with the creased cover that she had been using since June. He held it up, tilted it toward his friends. "Maybe she needs to be shown how this works." Sloane stood up. It was not a dramatic movement. There was no sudden shift in energy, no signal moment that would have told you what was coming. She simply rose from her crouch to her full height in one smooth motion and stood there looking at him. The hallway had gone as quiet as it was going to get. "Give it back," she said. He laughed. It was a good laugh, practiced easy, the laugh of someone who has been the loudest person in the room for so long that the acoustics now worked in his favor automatically. "Or what?" he said. "What are you going to do?" She looked at him for one full second, just one. She took a step forward, not rushed, not aggressive, the step of someone who has decided something. "I warned you," she said. He was still smiling when he grabbed her arm. She had practiced the response to exactly this movement, a grab above the elbow, downward and inward pressure, more times than she could easily number. The complete foundational sequence Warren had run her through 4,000 times across 14 months. This specific geometry, this exact mechanic of redirect and release, she had broken out separately on Tuesday nights after the main class ended and drilled it alone on the mat until the gymnasium lights shut off automatically at 9. She did not know the precise count for this particular technique. She had stopped counting it at some point because it had stopped feeling like a number and started feeling like a fact about her body. What she knew was that when Cole Harmon's hand closed around her arm, her nervous system did not consult her. It simply moved. She turned into the grab rather than away from it. Her left hand came up and over his wrist. Her weight dropped and shifted. She used the force he had already committed, all that size, all that certainty, and redirected it downward and forward with a precision that did not require strength because it did not rely on strength. It relied on physics, on the mechanical reality that a body traveling in one direction cannot instantly travel in another. Cole Harmon hit the floor, not gently, not performatively. He went down hard the way a large object goes down when the geometry suddenly stops working in its favor, and the sound of it, a flat, dense impact against polished concrete, moved through the hallway like a concussion. The silence that followed was total. Dex and Patterson had frozen. The students nearest to the scene had taken small, involuntary steps backward. Somewhere at the far end of the hallway, a phone was being raised. Somewhere closer, someone exhaled through their teeth. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Cole was on the ground. He looked up at her from a position that his body had never occupied before in a public space in front of people who knew his name and his father's name and the number on his jersey. Sloane stood above him. She was breathing normally. Her hands were at her sides. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said quietly, clearly into the stillness, "That was restraint." She picked up her notebook from where it had fallen. She gathered the last of her scattered papers. She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder, and she walked down the hallway. Nobody stopped her. No one said a word. She did not go to class. She turned left at the end of the corridor, took the stairs to the second floor, walked to the office suite at the far end of the East Hall. The door with the nameplate that read Dr. Ruth Calloway Academic Advising was open. Dr. Calloway was at her desk with a coffee and a stack of enrollment forms. Sloane came in and sat down in the chair across from her. She reached into the front pocket of her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She placed it on the desk. Dr. Calloway looked at her, really looked at her for a moment before she looked at the paper. She was 61 years old, had been at Westbrook for 19 years, and had developed over that time a fairly accurate instinct for what was sitting across from her on any given morning. What was sitting across from her now was not a frightened student. It was not an angry student. It was something more unusual, a young woman who had arrived at her door with a level of self-possession that did not entirely add up given that she was 19 and had presumably just been involved in something that was already, judging by the sound of notifications Calloway had been hearing from down the hall, generating significant attention. She looked at the paper. It was a list, neatly written in small, precise handwriting. Names of students positioned near the main corridor at the relevant time. The location and approximate field of view of 3 security cameras she had identified. A brief sequential account of events from her perspective, time-stamped to the minute. She had written it the night before. Dr. Calloway was quiet for a moment. Then she said carefully, "How long have you been carrying this around?" Sloane Reeves looked at her without flinching. "Since the last time," she said. The office was very quiet. Outside the window, through 2 floors of brick and glass, the hallway was still buzzing, voices rising, a clip already circulating, the particular frenzy of a campus absorbing new information about one of its own. But in here, in this small room with its stacked enrollment forms and its single window, and its 19 years of carefully accumulated perspective, something else was happening. Dr. Calloway looked at the list again. She looked at the girl across from her. She picked up the paper, folded it once, and placed it carefully in the top left drawer of her desk, the drawer she used for things that mattered. "All right," she said, and her voice carried something that Sloane Reeves had not heard directed at her in a very long time. Not pity, not concern, something more useful than either of those. Respect. "Tell me everything," Dr. Calloway said. "From the beginning." And for the first time in as long as she could remember, Sloane Reeves did. She talked for 45 minutes. She did not cry. She described Lincoln High the way you describe a place you have spent a long time processing, not as a victim recounting trauma, but as a witness giving testimony. Precise, sequential, without editorializing. She told Calloway about the 8 months, about the photographs, about the 3 assaults. She told her about the facility. She told her about the church gymnasium in Warren Briggs and the 14 months that followed. She told her about the contract she had read 4 times and what she understood the clause to mean and why she had signed it anyway. Calloway listened to all of it without interrupting. When Sloan finished, she sat with her for a moment, really sat with it, the way you sit with something that has just rearranged your understanding of the situation you are in. Then she said, "I'm going to keep this file, and I want you to know that I'm on your side here. That doesn't mean I can fix everything, but it means you are not navigating this alone." Sloan nodded. She picked up her bag. At the door, she paused. She said, "The person who was recording in the hallway, his name is Derek Nash. He records everything. He would have the whole incident from the beginning." Calloway wrote the name down. Sloan went to the library. The clip was 40 seconds long. Derek Nash had been recording since before Cole stepped into Sloan's path that morning. He had footage of everything. He had Cole stepping into her path. He had the books going down. He had the crouching and the whisper, the notebook raised. He had Sloan standing. He had the grab. He had the movement, that extraordinary geometric, almost architectural movement. And he had Cole on the floor. And he had those 2 words hanging in the sudden silence. He had all of it. What he posted was the last 40 seconds. He did not make a conscious decision to cut the beginning. That was the thing he would come back to later in the specific small hours of the night when the mind insists on reviewing its own worst moments. He had not sat down and thought, "I will post this version and not that version." He had simply opened the app, selected the clip, and his thumb had moved to trim it in the way that his thumb always moved when something was too long or to post automatically, aesthetically, without moral accounting. The 40 seconds were the interesting part. The 40 seconds were what people would watch. The 40 seconds began with Sloan standing up and ended with Cole on the floor, and it looked stripped of everything that preceded it, like a young woman attacking a young man for no discernible reason in a crowded college hallway. He posted it at 8:23 in the morning. By 11 o'clock, it had been shared 900 times. By 1 in the afternoon, 2,000. The caption read, "New girl first day, make it make sense." He had not meant it the way it landed. But language stripped of context acquires the meaning of whoever is reading it, and the people reading it had no context to bring it to. They had 40 seconds in a caption. They had a girl, a boy, a floor. The comments filled in the rest. Cole Harmon did not watch the clip spread in real time. He was in the training room at the athletic center, having his left arm examined by the team's physical therapist, a methodical man named Ray who had been working with Westbrook athletes for 15 years and who had the professional discretion to not say anything about what he had heard had happened, but whose silence was its own kind of communication. Cole's arm was bruised, not seriously, no structural damage, nothing that would affect practice by Wednesday. But the bruise ran from just below his elbow to the inside of his forearm in a pattern that was deeply specifically embarrassing, because it was the bruise left by a wrist lock applied with precision, and anyone who knew what they were looking at would know exactly what had created it and how. Ray wrapped it. Cole did not speak. His phone had been going off continuously since 8:30, and he had turned it face down on the table next to him and had not looked at it since. He did not need to look at it to know what was happening. He could feel it, the specific atmospheric pressure of a campus turning its attention towards you the way you can feel weather before it arrives. He had not gone back to the hallway. He had not spoken to Dex or Patterson. He had walked from the hallway directly to the athletic center through the side entrance that the players used, and he had sat in the training room and waited for Ray with the particular controlled stillness of a person managing something that, if it were allowed to become uncontrolled, would be very loud indeed. At 11:15, he walked to the main office of the athletic department and told the administrative coordinator that he needed to speak with Dean Stafford. He was seen at 2 o'clock. Dean Richard Stafford had been at Westbrook for 12 years. He had a doctorate in educational administration and a natural talent for the kind of institutional diplomacy that large organizations require, the ability to hear multiple versions of a situation simultaneously and respond in a way that committed to none of them while appearing to take all of them seriously. He was not a dishonest man. He was a practical one, which in institutional context sometimes amounts to the same thing, but is philosophically distinct. He sat across from Cole Harmon and listened. Cole told him there had been an altercation, that a student had physically assaulted him in the main hallway without provocation, that there were witnesses, that he had a bruised arm and was on advice he had received from 2 friends who were pre-law students formally filing a complaint. Stafford listened to all of this with his hands folded on his desk and his face arranged in the expression of a man receiving information he will need to process carefully before he responds to it. He asked Cole if he had seen the video circulating online. Cole said he had not. Stafford turned his monitor so Cole could see it. Cole watched the 40 seconds. He watched it in the way you watch a recording of yourself doing something you are not proud of, with a particular quality of stillness, an absence of reaction that is itself a reaction. When it ended, Stafford said, "Is this an accurate representation of what occurred?" Cole said, "She attacked me." Stafford said, "I'd like to speak with the student in question before I make any determination. But I want you to understand that a formal complaint has been received and logged, and that I am required to act on it. Are there students who witnessed this who would be willing to make statements?" Cole gave him two names, Dex, Patterson. Stafford wrote them down. He told Cole he would be in touch. He showed him to the door with the practiced courtesy of a man who has shown a great many people to a great many doors without letting them know which way he was leaning. When Cole was gone, Stafford sat back down at his desk. He opened the bottom right drawer and pulled out a binder that contained, among other things, the terms and conditions of every merit scholarship currently active at Westbrook University. He found what he was looking for in 3 minutes. The clause was not buried. It was not fine print. It was in the main body of the contract, third page, second paragraph, in language that was direct and unambiguous. Any physical altercation in which the scholarship recipient is a participant, regardless of the specific circumstances of said altercation, shall constitute grounds for immediate review and potential revocation of scholarship status, pending investigation by the Office of Academic Affairs, regardless of the specific circumstances. He read that phrase twice. Then he picked up the phone and called Dr. Ruth Calloway. Sloan did not know about the clip until 2 in the afternoon. She had spent the morning in Dr. Calloway's office and then in the library working through the first 3 chapters of an organic chemistry text with the focused intensity of a person using academic concentration as a form of ballast. The reading was not difficult. She had covered the material independently over the summer, but the act of working through it, carefully annotating in the margins, cross-referencing the index, gave her hands something to do and her mind something to hold. She had eaten lunch alone at a table in the far corner of the campus dining hall. She had chosen it without deliberating, the way she chose all seats now, instinctively, before conscious thought arrived to ratify the decision. Her back was to the wall. The exit was where she could see it. Old habit. The kind that does not feel like a habit anymore because it has become something closer to anatomy. A girl she had never spoken to sat down across from her at 1:45 and put her phone on the table with the clip already playing. She said, "Is this you?" Sloan watched the 40 seconds. She watched it twice. She handed the phone back without speaking, picked up her tray, and left the dining hall. She walked to Merritt Hall, went up to the second floor, unlocked her room, and sat on the edge of her bed. The room was exactly as she had left it that morning. The textbooks on the desk open to the pages she had been working from. The one duffel bag in the corner. The single photograph she had brought, her mother Patricia at the kitchen table in the Columbus apartment, laughing at something outside the frame not posed, caught mid-moment, taken on Sloan's phone the morning she left for Westbrook. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the photograph for a while. Her phone was lighting up. Numbers she did not know. A campus social media account had reposted the clip. Someone had found her profile and tagged her in a comment. The comments were not good. Not all of them. Some were neutral, some were curious. A significant number were the specific kind of hostile that people who have never met you feel entitled to direct at you when a screen separates the two of you and the clip they have seen has been stripped of everything that would make you comprehensible. She turned the phone face down. She thought about the contract. She had read it 4 times before signing. She had understood what that clause meant when she signed it. She had understood that it was a condition that looked like a protection but functioned as a lever. And she had signed it anyway because it was the only way into this room, this campus, this future. She had signed it because she had planned to stay invisible. She had not planned for Cole Harmon. But then the things that break plans never announce themselves in advance. Dr. Calloway called her at 3:15. She said, "I need you to come to my office. Dean Stafford wants to meet with both of us tomorrow morning at 9. Sloan said, "Is this about the scholarship?" A pause. "I want to talk about this in person." Sloan said, "Dr. Calloway, is this about the scholarship?" Another pause shorter. "Yes." Sloan sat with the phone against her ear for a moment after the call ended. Outside her window, the campus was running its ordinary late afternoon rhythms, students crossing the quad, The distant sound of the practice field, a group of freshmen somewhere below doing the loud performative socializing of people who have not yet found their actual friends but need to be seen looking like they have. She got up, she went to her desk, she opened her organic chemistry textbook to chapter 4. She studied until 9 o'clock. The meeting with Dean Stafford was at 9 the following morning, and before she could explain anything, he placed the contract on the table. He was not unkind about it. That was one of the things she would remember later, the particular quality of his manner, which was not cold and was not cruel, and was in its way almost apologetic. He was a man performing a function. The function was institutional. It had its own logic, its own momentum, and it did not require him to be a villain to move forward. He read the clause aloud, the one about physical altercations, regardless of circumstances. He said that a formal complaint had been filed, that the complaint required investigation, that during the period of investigation her scholarship was under review, that this did not mean it would be revoked, that it meant the process had been initiated, and that she had the opportunity to present her account. Sloan listened. When he finished, she said, "He grabbed me first." Stafford said, "I understand that is your account of the events." She said, "There are security cameras in that corridor." He said, "We are aware of that." She said, "There is a video circulating that begins after the point at which he grabbed me. The full recording begins earlier. I gave Dr. Calloway the names of students who were in a position to have recorded from the beginning. If you review those," Stafford held up a hand, not dismissively, "the hand of a man who wants her to know he has heard her, not the hand of a man who is going to act on what she has said." He said, "The investigation will take into account all available evidence. What I need you to understand is that the review of your scholarship status has been formally initiated, and that regardless of what the investigation determines about the details of the incident, the clause in your contract activates at the point of a documented physical altercation." Dr. Calloway, sitting beside Sloan, said, "Richard, this student was defending herself." Stafford said, "Ruth, I understand that is the claim. I am telling both of you what the contract says." There was a silence in the room. Sloan looked at the contract on the table. At the third page, the second paragraph, the phrase she had read 4 times before signing. "Regardless of the specific circumstances." She said, "What do I need to do?" After the meeting in the corridor outside Stafford's office, Dr. Calloway walked beside her and did not immediately speak. At the end of the corridor, she said, "I need to tell you something." Sloan waited. Calloway said, "When you came to my office yesterday morning and you told me about Lincoln High, about what happened in there, about the hospitalization, about Warren Briggs, I told Dean Stafford all of it this morning before you arrived, with your file." Sloan said, "Did it change anything?" Calloway was quiet for a moment. "It changed what he knows. Whether it changes what he does is a different question." That was an honest answer. Sloan appreciated honest answers even when they were not good ones. What Calloway had told Stafford, what she had laid out for him with the careful, thorough manner of a woman who had spent 19 years making sure things were understood correctly, was this: Sloan Reeves had attended Lincoln High School in Columbus, Ohio. During 2.5 years there, she had been the target of sustained and systematic bullying that escalated over approximately 8 months from verbal harassment to physical assault. She had been beaten by a group of students. Photographs taken without her knowledge had been distributed across multiple platforms. She had been systematically isolated until she could no longer manage it alone. In the fall of her junior year, she had been admitted to a psychiatric facility in Columbus for 3 weeks. After coming home, she found her way to a man named Warren Briggs, a 68-year-old veteran who ran a free self-defense program out of a church gymnasium on the east side of the city. She trained with him for 14 months. Calloway did not read the next part from the file. She said it from memory, the way you say things that have settled into you during the process of understanding them, the 4,000 repetitions. The standard that did not accept partial credit. The single thing Briggs had told her on the first night that had mattered more than all the technique combined. Stafford did not ask what it was. He did not need to. The girl sitting in the chair outside his door had already demonstrated it. Stafford had listened to all of it. He had thanked Calloway for the context. He had placed the contract on the table. The clip was still circulating. It had been shared across campus platforms and had found its way onto 2 external sites. The comments continued to accumulate. Most of the people commenting had no information beyond the 40 seconds. The narrative was doing what narratives do online in their early hours, shifting, multiplying, acquiring a dozen conflicting versions simultaneously, each one certain it was the real one. Derek Nash knew all of this because he had been watching it happen since 8:23 the previous morning, and the watching had produced in him a feeling that was somewhere between anxiety and something that he did not yet have a precise word for. But that was, if he were honest with himself, the feeling of a person beginning to understand the full dimensions of a thing he has done. He had the full recording on his phone. He had always had it. He had never deleted it, part of the same instinct that had made him record it in the first place. He watched the full recording 3 times that afternoon in the practice complex locker room alone while the rest of the team was in a film session. He watched Cole step into her path. He watched the books go down. He watched Cole crouch beside her and say something with his face arranged in the expression Derek recognized not from this morning specifically, but from 100 mornings like it over the 2 years he had known Cole. The expression Cole wore when he was performing, when he was playing for the crowd. Derek had laughed at that expression many times. He had been part of the crowd it played for. He had never thought particularly hard about what it felt like from the other side of it. He was thinking hard about it now. He opened the compose window on his phone. He had Calloway's faculty email from the directory. He typed a short message. He attached the full recording. His thumb hovered over the send button, the one that would put the complete 112 seconds in front of someone who needed to see it. His thumb did not move. He told himself he was waiting for the right moment. He told himself it was more complicated than it looked, that Cole was his friend, that he did not know what the consequences would be, that maybe the situation would resolve on its own without him having to be the one who made it worse for everyone. He sat with those justifications for a long time and examined them carefully. He knew even as he did it that none of them were the real reason. The real reason was simpler and harder to say. He was afraid of Cole Harmon. Not of Cole specifically, but of what stepping out of Cole's orbit would cost him. Of what it meant to stop being the person who stood near the crowd and let the crowd define him. He closed the compost window, he put his phone in his pocket and went out to practice. Cole came into the locker room after the film session. He moved past Derek without much acknowledgement, not coldly, not pointedly, just the way you move past a friend when your mind is somewhere that does not include them. Cole sat down on the bench by his locker and pulled out his phone. He dialed something, lifted the phone to his ear, waited. It went to voicemail. He dialed again, same result. On the third attempt, someone picked up. The conversation that followed was short. Derek was on the far end of the locker room and could not hear most of it, just the particular quality of Cole's voice when he was talking to his father. The shift in register that happened automatically always whenever Frank Harmon's name appeared in Cole's contacts. Slightly higher, slightly tighter. The voice of a 20-year-old who somewhere inside himself was still trying to earn the approval of a man who had been withholding it strategically since Cole was old enough to understand that it was being withheld. Cole listened, spoke briefly, listened again, said yes sir, twice. He lowered the phone. He looked at the screen for a moment. Then he set it face down on the bench beside him with a precision that was not calm. It was the movement of a person placing something down very carefully in order to avoid throwing it. Derek had known Cole Harmon for 2 years. He had watched him after losses, after good games, after arguments with coaches, after the particular specific disappointment that came with being the son of Frank Harmon and not yet the legend that implied. He had seen a range of things in Cole's face. He had not seen this. Cole's face was empty in a way that was different from his usual silences. It was the emptiness of a face that has stopped performing. That has, for one unguarded moment, stopped doing the work that faces like his do continuously, automatically, at enormous cost. He looked in that moment very young. Derek looked down at his own phone, at the full recording he had not sent, at the compost window he had closed. He did not say anything to Cole. He put his phone in his pocket. The first piece of good news arrived on Wednesday morning. It came in the form of a message relayed through Dr. Calloway, not an official communication, not anything that could be committed to writing with institutional formality, but a quiet word from someone adjacent to Stafford's office who had been moved to communicate informally what the formal channels had not yet produced. The message was, "It looks like it's going your way." Sloan read it twice. She was sitting in the library, the same chair, the same corner, when Calloway's text came through with those words. Something in her chest shifted, a loosening, a small surrender of the sustained vigilance she had been carrying since Monday morning. Just a small one, just enough to let in the possibility that this might resolve correctly. She typed back one word. Okay. She put her phone face up on the table for the first time in 3 days. She turned back to her textbook. She read 4 pages, annotated 2 of them. At 8:14 the following morning, an email arrived from the office of the dean. She was still in bed when it arrived. She had heard her phone signal and reached for it with the unhurried movement of someone who had allowed herself for the first time in a week to sleep past 6. She opened the email in the gray light of early morning with her back against the headboard and the photograph of her mother on the desk across the room. The email was brief, professional, precise. It said, following review of the complaint filed on Monday, September 4th, and in accordance with Section 3, Paragraph 2 of the Westbrook University Merit Scholarship Terms and Conditions Agreement, the Office of Academic Affairs has confirmed that a physical altercation occurred in which scholarship recipient Sloan Reeves was a participant. As per the terms of the agreement, formal review of scholarship status is hereby initiated. The recipient is advised to refrain from further incidents while review proceedings are ongoing. She read it twice. Then she set the phone face down on the blanket. She lay in the gray morning light and she thought about the full recording on Derek Nash's phone. She had listed him in her notes as someone who would have captured the beginning. She thought about the meeting Calloway had described Stafford sitting with the evidence. She thought about the phrase, regardless of circumstances. She thought about the way Stafford had not said she was wrong, had not said she was at fault, had simply, with the procedure of a man who understands how systems protect themselves, applied the clause. He had seen what happened in that hallway. He had initiated the review anyway, because the contract said he could, because the contract said regardless, because somewhere in the financial architecture of Westbrook University, the equation between one merit scholarship and the institutional cost of a formal investigation into the conduct of a member of the football program had been run, and the result had come out in a direction that had nothing to do with what was right and everything to do with what was protected. She got up, she dressed, she made coffee in the small machine on the corner of her desk. She stood at the window and watched the campus come to life, below the early walkers, the maintenance crew near the east building, the first students crossing the quad with their bags. She thought about Warren Briggs. She thought about the way he used to say in the Tuesday sessions when everything had gone wrong in a drill and she was tired and frustrated and ready to believe that some obstacles were simply too large to be managed by physics, start over from zero. Not from where you are, from zero. Because the technique does not care how many times you have tried. It only cares whether you are doing it right this time. She drank her coffee. She picked up her phone. She called Dr. Calloway at 7:45 in the morning. Calloway answered on the second ring. Sloan told her about the email. Calloway was quiet in a way that said she had been expecting this and that her expectation had not made it easier to hear. Then she said, "Come to my office at 8:30. We are going to figure out what we do next." Sloan said, "Is there anything to figure out?" Calloway said, "There's always something to figure out." Sloan put on her jacket. She picked up her bag. She checked the front pocket out of habit. The habit of checking for the folded piece of paper that was no longer there, that was in Calloway's top left drawer where it needed to be. The pocket was empty. She zipped it closed. She went down the stairs. She went through the front door of Merritt Hall and out into the morning. The campus looked exactly the same as it had on Monday. The brick buildings, the wide lawns, the broken clock tower standing in its permanent, approximate accuracy. Students moving between buildings with the particular early morning purposefulness of people who have not yet fully inhabited the day. She walked through it with her bag against her chest and her eyes aimed at the middle distance. Not at the floor, not anymore. Somewhere across campus, in the weight room that opened at 6 for the team, Cole Harmon was going through a morning routine he had performed every day since he was 15. The same sequence, the same movements his father had prescribed, executed with the focused, joyless efficiency of a person going through the motions of a life he had not chosen carefully enough. His phone was face down on the bench beside him. He had not checked it since the night before, not since the voicemail. He had listened to his father's message at 11:30 and had placed the phone down with that particular controlled precision, the gesture of a person managing something at the very edge of their capacity to manage it. He had not deleted the voicemail. He had left it there unplayed a second time, the way you leave something in a drawer you are not ready to open and not ready to throw away. He pressed the bar up for the last repetition. He held it at the top. He let it down. He sat up on the bench and looked at the ceiling of the weight room for a longer time, thinking about nothing in particular, which was for Cole Harmon, a person who had always moved toward things, its own kind of answer. The knock came at 2:17 in the morning. Sloan had not been asleep. She had been sitting on the floor with her back against the bed frame and her duffel bag open in front of her, placing things into it with the same methodical care she had used to unpack them 6 days earlier. The organic chemistry textbook. The annotated notebook from the first week of classes. The small kit of pens she had bought at the campus bookstore on her second day still mostly full. She was not packing in a frantic, defeated way. She was packing in the quiet, deliberate way of someone who is trying to maintain dignity in a situation that keeps making it harder. The scholarship review email had said the process was ongoing. It had not said revoked. But Sloan had read the contract enough times to understand the architecture of what was happening, and the architecture said that the process had one destination. Stafford had seen the full recording. He had seen everything. He had sent the email anyway. The clause said regardless of circumstances, and he had decided to let it mean exactly what it said. She had been thinking about this for 3 hours. She had been working through it the way she worked through problems that did not yield a straightforward analysis, circling them, approaching from different angles, looking for the geometry underneath. But there was no geometry here. There was only a contract and a man who had chosen to honor the letter of it instead of the spirit, and a scholarship that was the only reason she was in this room at all. She picked up the photograph of her mother, Patricia, at the kitchen table in Columbus, laughing at something outside the frame. Not posed. Caught mid-moment alive in it. She set it carefully on top of the textbook in the bag. That was when the knock came. She did not move immediately. She sat with her hands on her knees and waited to see if it would come again. It did. 3 times. Quiet, not urgent. The knock of someone who wants you to know they are there but is not sure you should have to answer. She got up and opened the door. Derek Nash was standing in the hallway. He was still in practice clothes, which meant he had either come directly from somewhere or had been sitting in them for hours without thinking about changing. His hands were in the front pocket of his hoodie, and he was looking at her with the expression of a person who has been rehearsing something and has just realized upon arrival that the rehearsal was insufficient. She looked at him. He said, "I know what time it is." She said, "I know who you are." He looked at the open bag visible behind her through the door, at the photograph resting on top of the textbook. He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into the side pocket of his hoodie and pulled out his phone. He held it out to her. The screen was already open to the video. The full recording. 112 seconds, not 40. Beginning before she had come around the corner. Beginning with the empty hallway and Cole and his 2 teammates standing by the stairwell in the ordinary, unhurried posture of people who have not yet decided what they are going to do with the next several minutes, but know in some unexamined way that they will do something. She looked at the phone. She said, "How long have you had this?" He said, "Since Monday morning." She did not say anything. He said, "I posted the clip before I thought about it. That's the truth. I didn't sit down and decide to make her look bad. I just posted what I had, and by the time I realized what it looked like, it had already—" He stopped. He looked at his hands. "That's not an excuse. I'm just telling you what happened." She was still holding the door. She was looking at him with an expression that was not anger and was not forgiveness, and occupied the space between those 2 things where most important human moments actually occur. She said, "What do you want to do with it?" He said, "I want to give it to Stafford. The full thing. Tonight if there's an email, or first thing tomorrow." He paused. "I wanted to give it to him on Monday. I want you to know that." She said, "But you were afraid of Cole." He did not deny it. He looked at the floor and nodded once, the nod of a person accepting an accurate assessment. She said, "So was I. That is not the same as an excuse either, but it's true." She took the phone from his hand. She watched the full 112 seconds standing in the doorway of her room at 2 in the morning. She watched Cole step into her path. She watched the books go down. She watched herself kneeling on the floor with her hands trembling in a way she had not known anyone had captured, and she felt something looking at that. Not shame, not quite, but the particular discomfort of seeing your own vulnerability rendered in high definition and handed back to you. She watched the rest. The standing up, the grab, the movement, the 2 words. She handed the phone back to Derek Nash. She said, "Send it to Dr. Calloway's email tonight. I will send you the address. She can present it at the hearing tomorrow." He took the phone. He said, "I'm sorry I didn't do this on Monday." She looked at him for a moment. He was 20 years old and he had done something wrong that was not malicious and had waited too long to correct it and had come here at 2 in the morning because the waiting had become untenable. She understood all of that. She said, "Send the video." She closed the door. She stood in the middle of her room for a long moment. Then she crossed to the desk, opened to her laptop, typed Dr. Calloway's email address into a message, and sent it to the number Derek had given her. She heard the phone signal confirmation that the message had delivered. She sat down at the desk. She looked at the open duffel bag on the floor. at the photograph of her mother on top of the organic chemistry textbook. She reached into the bag and took the photograph out. She set it back on the desk in the corner where it had been since the first day. She did not unpack the rest of it that night, not because she was certain of the outcome, but because there was a difference between packing because you had decided to leave and packing because you had surrendered to someone else's decision and she had not yet surrendered. She turned off the light. She lay down on top of the blanket with her shoes still on, looking at the ceiling until the gray light of morning began at the edges of the window. At 6:15, her phone showed a message from Dr. Calloway. It said, "I watched it. Come to my office at 8." Cole Harmon woke up at 5:45 on Thursday morning, the same way he had woken up every morning since he was 15 years old. The alarm, the ceiling, the specific moment of reorientation where you remember what day it is and what it requires of you. He lay there for the prescribed 17 seconds, one of his father's early prescriptions, so deeply ingrained it had become indistinguishable from instinct, and then he got up. He did not go to the weight room. He had not decided not to go. He had simply found himself, after dressing, standing in the middle of his room with no particular sense of direction. This was unusual for him. He was a person who moved toward things, who had objectives and pursued them with the forward momentum of someone who has been told since childhood that momentum is the same as identity. He stood in the middle of his room and did not move. On the desk was his phone. The voicemail from his father was still there, still unplayed a second time, the small indicator that had been sitting in the corner of the screen since Wednesday night. He looked at it right now. He picked up the phone and looked at the indicator for a long time. Then he pressed play. His father's voice filled the room. Frank Harmon spoke the way he had always spoken, with the particular authority of a man who had been the most important person in every room he had entered for decades, and who had not yet encountered a room that had taught him otherwise. The voice was not shouting. It was doing something colder than shouting. It was pronouncing. You went down in front of everyone, the whole campus. You let a girl, and he said the word in a way that made it a weapon, put you on the floor. And then you're telling me you filed a complaint. You think that makes it better. You think anyone looks at you after that and sees a harm and you fix this. However, you have to fix it. You make sure she is gone from that campus. That is what you do. The message ended. Cole set the phone down. He sat on the edge of his bed with his hands on his knees and thought about the word fix. He had been hearing that word his entire life. Fix your footwork. Fix your release. Fix your attitude. Fix your grades. Fix your face. That one from middle school, when he had apparently been displaying an expression that his father had decided was weakness. Fix was his father's universal prescription for every gap between Cole Harmon as he currently existed and Cole Harmon as the legend required him to be. Fix this. However you have to, make sure she is gone. He thought about Sloane Reeves on the floor of the hallway gathering her papers with hands that he had seen even in that moment, even while he was performing, were not quite steady. He had noticed that. He had noticed it and kept talking because the audience required him to keep talking, because the performance had a structure and it needed a conclusion. He thought about the bruise on his arm. He thought about Dex and Patterson making statements to Stafford, about the legal-sounding language his father had used. Make sure she is gone. He picked up the phone. He did not call his father back. He opened his contacts and scrolled to the number he had been given at the start of the year as part of the standard athletic department orientation. The direct line for Dean Stafford's office. Players were told to use it only for serious matters. It was 5:58 in the morning. He left a message saying he needed to meet with Stafford before 9. He said it was important. He said it was about the complaint. He put on his jacket. He went outside into the early morning and walked across campus in the gray light alone, with his hands in his pockets. Stafford arrived at his office at 7:40. He found 2 messages waiting. One was from Dr. Calloway, sent at 2:38 in the morning, with a video attached and a note that said, "I believe you need to see this before the hearing." The full recording. It was in the hands of a student who has now come forward. The other was from Cole Harmon requesting an early meeting. Stafford sat down at his desk. He opened the video. He watched all of it. He watched it twice. He sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for 30 seconds in the way of a man calculating something that is not at its core a mathematical problem. He had been here before, not in these exact circumstances, but in the general territory. The place where institutional logic and human reality diverge, and a decision has to be made about which one you are actually serving. He had navigated that territory for 12 years with the practical diplomacy of a man who understood that systems require maintenance, and that maintenance sometimes requires you to look away from things you have seen. He was thinking in this particular moment about what he had seen. He was thinking about a 19-year-old who had come to Westbrook with a folded piece of paper she had prepared the night before because preparation was the only form of control that had not failed her. He was thinking about 3 weeks in a facility in Columbus and 14 months in a church gymnasium and 4,000 repetitions of a movement that a 68-year-old veteran had drilled into her because he had decided that this was the most useful thing he could do with the time he had. He was thinking about the clause he had read aloud to her 2 days ago. Regardless of the specific circumstances, he had hidden behind that clause. He knew it. He had allowed the clause to do work that he should have done himself because the clause was easier and the alternative was complicated, and the athletic department had been a reliable institutional ally for 12 years, and he had not wanted to complicate that. He was no longer certain that was going to be tenable. At 8:15, Cole Harmon knocked on his open door. He came in and sat down in the chair across from Stafford's desk. He was wearing his jacket from the morning walk, his hands clasped in his lap. His face was in an expression Stafford had not seen before on the face of any athlete he had worked with in 12 years. Not defiance, not performance, not managed composure, just a face. Cole said, "I need to tell you something before the hearing." Stafford said, "All right." Cole said, "What I told you on Monday was not the complete account of what happened." Stafford waited. Cole said, "I stepped into her path. I knocked her books down. What she did afterward was a response to something I started." He paused. "I filed the complaint because my father told me to. That's the truth, and I'm telling you now because—" He stopped. He looked at his hands. Stafford did not rush him. Cole said, "Because I'm done fixing things for him." It was a short sentence. 6 words. It had clearly cost something to say, not in the way that dramatic statements cost something in movies, but in the quieter way that true things cost when they have been carried a long time before being set down. Stafford sat with it appropriately. Then he said, "There is a hearing at 9 o'clock. I would like you to say what you just told me in that room on the record." Cole said, "I know." Stafford said, "You understand what that means for the complaint?" Cole said, "Yes." Stafford reached across his desk and turned his monitor so Cole could see it. The video was paused at the beginning, the hallway before anything. Cole and his teammates at the stairwell. He said, "This came to me this morning from Dr. Calloway." The full recording. Cole looked at the screen. He looked at himself in it, the before version, the version that existed in the 20 seconds prior to the moment the familiar performance had engaged. He looked at himself standing there in the ordinary morning hallway, and something moved in his face that Stafford chose not to name. Cole said, "Play it." Stafford played it. Cole watched all of it. He watched himself step into her path. He watched the books go down. He watched himself crouch beside her, the practiced angle of his face, the voice calibrated exactly for that audience. He watched Sloan stand up. He watched what happened next. When it ended, he was very still. He said, "She really did warn me." Stafford said, "Yes." Cole nodded. Not at Stafford, at something else. At the screen, or at the space behind the screen, or at some private accounting that was occurring in real time, the kind that does not announce itself, but that changes the orientation of everything that follows. He said, "I'll be at the hearing." He stood up. For the first time since he had walked into the office, he looked like a person who was not entirely certain what came next, which was, of all the things Stafford had observed about Cole Harmon in 2 years, the most honest thing he had ever seen in the young man's face. Stafford showed him to the door. The emergency hearing was held in the conference room adjacent to the Office of Academic Affairs, a table that seated 10, a projector, a window facing the quad with Venetian blinds at half-mast against the morning light. By 9 o'clock, the room held 7 people: Dean Stafford, Dr. Calloway, a representative from the Office of Student Affairs named Helen Marsh, who handled disciplinary proceedings; Cole Harmon, 2 members of the faculty review panel, a historian named Brower, and a chemist named Kelso, who had been on these panels for a combined 31 years, and Sloan Reeves. Sloan had come with nothing. No folder, no prepared statement, no legal representation. She sat in the chair at the near end of the table with her hands flat on the surface and her back straight, and her face arranged in the expression that Dr. Calloway had come to recognize over the past 3 days as Sloan's working expression. Not defiant, not anxious, simply present, alert. The expression of a person who has decided to be exactly where they are. She had looked at Cole when she came in. He had looked back. Neither of them had spoken. The look had lasted approximately 1 second and had communicated in the compressed language of people who have already been in each other's presence during something significant, more than a conversation would have managed. Stafford opened the proceedings. He summarized the complaint. He summarized the scholarship clause. He said that new evidence had been brought to his attention since the initiation of the review and that the hearing was convened to allow that evidence to be presented and to allow all parties to speak. He played the full video. 112 seconds in a room of 7 people is a different thing than 112 seconds on a phone in a hallway. The room amplified it. The silence around it had weight. People who had already seen parts of it were now seeing the whole, and the whole was a different story from any of its parts, not a dramatic reversal, but the more unsettling kind of revelation that comes from simply seeing the context that was there all along. When it ended, the room was quiet. Helen Marsh looked at her notepad. Brower and Kelso looked at each other. Calloway looked at Sloan, who was looking at the blank screen where the video had been. Stafford asked Cole if he wished to make a statement. Cole said yes. He looked at the table. Then he looked up, not at Stafford, not at the faculty panel, but at Sloan directly in the way that a person looks at someone when they want the statement to reach the right destination. He said, "She defended herself. I started it." A pause. He said, "I filed the complaint because someone I trusted told me to. What I'm telling you now is the truth, and the complaint is not." He said, "She showed more restraint than I deserved." The last sentence landed in the room, and the room held it there. Stafford was looking at the table. Helen Marsh had stopped writing. Brower and Kelso, who had heard a great many statements in rooms like this one over a combined 31 years, were both very still. Calloway was looking at Sloan. Sloan was looking at Cole. There was something in her face that was not surprised she had assembled this possibility from the available facts and filed it away, neither counting on it nor dismissing it. But there was something. The specific recognition of someone who has seen in an unexpected place a kind of honesty that does not come easy to the person producing it. Stafford said, "Does anyone else wish to add to the record?" Calloway said, "I would like to note that Sloan Reeves came to my office the morning of the incident with a prepared account of the events, including witnesses and camera locations, before any formal complaint had been filed. That level of preparation indicates someone who understands the importance of institutional process, not someone acting impulsively or without consideration of consequences." Helen Marsh made a note. Stafford looked at Sloan. He said, "Is there anything you would like to say?" Sloan thought about it. She thought about all the things she could say: the 8 months at Lincoln High, the facility Warren Briggs in the church gymnasium on Tuesday evenings, the 4,000 repetitions, the contract she had read 4 times, the email she had received yesterday morning in the gray light with her mother's photograph on the desk across the room. She thought about the night before packing her bag by herself on the floor while the campus slept. She thought about Derek Nash standing in the hallway at 2 in the morning with his phone in his hand and the expression of someone who had finally stopped being afraid of the wrong thing. She said no. Stafford nodded. He looked at his notes. He looked at the blank screen. He exchanged the particular silent communication of people who have worked together long enough to speak in shorthand. He said, "I'm going to request a brief recess." The recess was 11 minutes. When they came back, Stafford spoke for 4 minutes in the measured, precise language of institutional decision-making. The full recording established clearly that Sloan Reeves had acted in response to a physical altercation initiated by Cole Harmon. The evidence did not support the characterization of the incident as unprovoked. The scholarship review initiated in accordance with the contract clause had now been fully completed. The scholarship was restored, effective immediately, in full. Cole Harmon, for initiating a physical altercation and for filing a complaint that he had now acknowledged to be materially inaccurate, would receive a 2-week suspension from the university's academic and athletic programs and was required to complete a 12-session program with the Campus Counseling Center as a condition of reinstatement. Stafford paused. He looked at Helen Marsh. He said, "I would also like to note for the record that the handling of this review by this office in particular, the initiation of scholarship review proceedings without full prior examination of available evidence, will itself be reviewed as part of a separate internal process." Helen Marsh wrote that down without expression. Calloway wrote it down. Sloan did not write it down. She sat at the end of the table with her hands still flat on the surface, and she listened to the words and let them arrive in whatever order they needed to arrive in, not performing relief, not performing vindication. Just sitting with it the way Warren Briggs had taught her to sit with the moment after a completed drill, not rushing past it, not making more of it than it was, just letting the completion be what it is. The hearing ended at 9:53. The room decomposed in the way rooms do after formal proceedings, conversations beginning at the edges, papers collected, chairs pushed back. Calloway came to Sloane and stood beside her for a moment. She did not say anything. She put her hand briefly on Sloane's shoulder and then moved away, and that was exactly right, the right gesture, the right duration containing everything that needed to be said without saying any of it. Cole was near the door with his jacket over his arm. Stafford was beside him, speaking quietly, the low-toned manner of an institutional figure delivering a private addendum. Cole was listening with his head slightly down, not the defensive posture of a person being lectured, but the more complicated posture of a person receiving information they have already decided not to resist. Sloane walked to the door. She passed Cole on the way out. The passage required some small navigation, the way two people navigate a narrow space, a slight adjustment of angle, a moment of shared spatial awareness. He looked at her. She looked at him. The moment was exactly 1 second long. She nodded. Not warmth, not forgiveness. Forgiveness was a longer road than a morning, and she had always known it would be. But acknowledgement. The specific acknowledgement that passes between people who have occupied the same significant moment from opposite sides and who both in their own way have arrived at something that resembled at the end a kind of honesty. He nodded back. She went out the door. The campus was in full morning operation. Students between classes, the maintenance crew near the east building, a pair of professors crossing the quad in conversation. The clock tower stood in its broken permanence, the hands reading 9:47, when it was actually 9:56, close enough to write that most people had long since stopped noticing the difference. She stood on the steps outside the academic building for a moment. The air was the specific air of a Midwest October morning, cool at the edges, carrying the smell of damp leaves from the oak trees along the south walkway, and underneath that, the institutional smell of the campus itself. Chalk and heating systems, in the particular compressed air of a building that had housed thousands of people over 60 years. It was the kind of air you did not think about unless you had for a few days believed you were about to lose the right to breathe it. She thought about her mother, about Patricia driving to the hospital from a night shift without sleeping first, about the drive home from the facility 3 weeks later, both of them quiet the Columbus streets running past the car windows in the gray afternoon light, her mother's hand on the gear shift at every red light, not asking anything, just present, just there. She thought about Warren Briggs in the church gymnasium on the east side of the city. The fluorescent light above the far mat that flickered twice before catching on Tuesday evenings. The particular way he had of watching you that made you feel like he was seeing something that mattered. Not something flattering, something real. She thought about what he had said on the third session, the sentence that had mattered more than all the technique combined, though she had not known that yet when she first heard it. Not, I'm teaching you to fight, never helpless again. She had not been helpless in that hallway. She had not been helpless in Stafford's office. She had not been helpless at 2 a.m. on the floor of her room with her bag open and her mother's photograph packed away. Frightened, yes. Sitting in the dark doing the arithmetic of how bad a situation had become and whether it was survivable. But not helpless. There was a difference, and she understood it now in a way she had only theoretically understood it when Warren Briggs first made it. Helplessness was not about circumstances. It was not about whether the situation was fair, or whether the odds were good, or whether the system was going to work the way it was supposed to work. It was about whether you still had a next move. Whether you could still think, still act, still choose. That was all it was. The next move did not have to be winning. It just had to be yours. She had always had a next move. She went to class. The room was a second-floor chemistry lecture hall that held 60 students. She arrived 4 minutes early, which was enough time to take the seat she had identified on the first day near the window, second row from the back, with a clear sight line to both exits. Some habits serve you well enough that there is no particular reason to change them. She sat down. She took out the black notebook with the creased cover, the one Cole had picked up, the one that had been on the floor and then in his hand, and then in the movement's aftermath, waiting on the ground to be gathered. It had 2 creases now, instead of one, a new fold near the spine from the fall. She ran her thumb along the new crease. She felt the difference between the original fold and the one that had come from that morning. The first crease was hers. The second one was the story. She opened it to the first page. The page was blank. She had not written anything in it yet. The first day had not gone the way she intended, and the notebook had stayed blank through the upheaval of the week, an unstarted thing waiting for a moment that kept not arriving. Until now. She took a pen from the front pocket of her bag. She wrote in the upper left corner of the first page in her small, precise handwriting, 2 words. Still here. She looked at them for a moment. She thought about everything it had taken to be able to write those two words in that particular corner of that particular room on this particular morning. She thought about Lincoln High and the church gymnasium and the gray mornings in the facility and her mother's hand on the gear shift and the folded piece of paper she had put in the front pocket of her bag on a Sunday night, because preparation was the only form of control that had never failed her. She thought about all of it. Then she turned to the next page and wrote the date at the top and drew a clean line beneath it, the way she always did, the way she had done in every notebook since she was old enough to understand that a line means you are starting something and you intend to take it seriously. The professor came in at the front of the room, set her bag on the desk, turned to write something on the board. Around Sloan, 60 students were settling and opening laptops, finishing conversations, performing the small, ordinary rituals of people preparing to learn something. The ordinary machinery of a morning that was ordinary for most of them and was for Sloan Reeves the first ordinary morning in 10 days. She had been here for 10 days. She had a merit scholarship, full tuition restored and renewed. She had a corner room on the second floor of Merritt Hall with one duffel bag and one backpack and a photograph of her mother in the corner of the desk where it had been since the first day. She had 3 textbooks she had already begun reading and a notebook that now had 2 words in it. She had a plan. The professor began to speak. Sloan Reeves opened the notebook to the page with the date on it, and she began to write. In Columbus, Ohio, on the east side of the city, the Presbyterian Church on Hargrove Street opened its gymnasium on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, the way it had for 9 years. At 5:30, the chairs were unstacked. At 6 o'clock, the mats went down. At 6:15, Warren Briggs arrived. He was 68 years old. His knees gave him trouble in cold weather, which in Columbus meant roughly 7 months out of 12. He drank his coffee black because he had never found a reason to change it. He had been teaching these evenings for 9 years because it was the most useful thing he had found to do with the time he had, and he was a man who placed high value on usefulness. He did not know what had happened at Westbrook University that week. Sloan had not called him. She would not call him until Thanksgiving, when she drove back to Columbus for the long weekend and stopped by the gymnasium on a Thursday evening and stood in the doorway while the current students ran their drills. He looked up from across the room and saw her. He did not wave or smile or change his expression in any way that someone watching from the outside would have registered as significant. He nodded once, the nod he used at the end of every session. Not praise, not relief, recognition. The acknowledgement of the task completed. She nodded back. After the students left and the mats had been rolled and the gymnasium was quiet, he poured 2 cups of coffee from the thermos he kept on the folding table by the far wall and handed her one. She took it. They stood together in the empty gymnasium for a moment, the fluorescent light above the far mat flickering twice the way it always did before it held. He said, "You doing all right?" She said, "Yeah." And he said, "Good." He drank his coffee. She drank hers. That was the whole of it. That was all that was required, because some things have already been said in the only language that matters, not in words but in the 4,000 repetitions of a movement that a 68-year-old veteran had drilled into a 17-year-old girl in this gymnasium across 14 months of Tuesday and Thursday evenings, until it stopped being something she performed and became something she was. He had done his part. A long time ago in the 3rd session, he had told her, "I am not teaching you to fight. I am teaching you to never be helpless again." She had not been. That was enough. The gymnasium lights ran on a timer. At 9 o'clock they dimmed, flickered once, and went dark. Warren Briggs finished his coffee in the dark, without hurrying, the way a man finishes things when he has nowhere else to be and no reason to pretend otherwise. Outside, the Columbus evening was doing what Columbus evenings do in October, the temperature-dropping leaves moving across the empty parking lot, the particular quality of autumn dark that smells like something ending and something else not yet begun. He rinsed both cups at the utility sink. He put on his jacket. He locked up and walked to his truck. He drove home on streets he had known for 40 years, past the blocks that had changed and the blocks that had not, through the east side of a city that had always asked something of the people who lived in it and had always found that some of them, against all probability, were able to give it. He did not think about Sloan Reeves specifically. He thought about all of them, the ones who had come through those doors over 9 years, with something broken in them, and the ones who had left with something rebuilt, and the ones he was still not sure about, and the ones he knew he would never find out about, because that was the nature of the work. You did it in the dark. You did it without knowing how it turned out. You did it because the alternative was to stop, and stopping had never once seemed like an option worth considering. He turned onto his street. He parked. He sat in the truck for a moment in the quiet of his own driveway, in the ordinary dark of an ordinary Thursday in October, and he thought about nothing in particular. Then he got out, he went inside, he had done his part.